Hello, thank you for joining me. We are today thinking about power and conflict poetry for AQA GCSE English Literature. It's paper 2 that this features in, and we're going to be thinking about one of the 15 poems today, and it will be Extract from the Prelude by William Wordsworth. So here's Wordsworth. He's considered to be one of the finest poets ever to write in the English language. He was a romantic poet, which means that he didn't write about love, but instead was interested in nature and the experiences that could give to us and how that can enhance our life. So if you want to look clever when you're talking about context, you can mention that William Wordsworth was a romantic poet. So today we're thinking about, as I said, Extract from the Prelude. It's a very challenging poem. Of all the 15, it's possibly the most challenging. It's got some very archaic language and is quite tricky to get your head around, but we'll try and keep it really simple today. You got a really straightforward story that's wrapped up with a lot of tricky language. So ultimately, it's William Wordsworth's own experience. He took a boat out on a lake, and while he had a row across the lake, he looked at a mountain ridge, and it made him reevaluate his life and gave him all these thoughts about life and death and sort of changed the way he felt about himself. So that's what the poem's about, really. He steals a boat, he has a go on a lake, he looks at a mountain, and he has this sort of like moment of sort of self-doubt. And here is the poem. Extract from the Prelude, William Wordsworth. One summer evening, led by her, I found a little boat tied to a willow tree within a rocky cove, its usual home. Straight I unloosed her chain and stepping in pushed from the shore. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure. Nor without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still on either side small circles glittering idly in the moon until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. But now, like one who rose, proud of his skill to reach a chosen point with an unswerving line, I fixed my view upon the summit of a craggy ridge, the horizon's utmost boundary. Far above was nothing but the stars and the grey sky. She was an elfin pinnace, lustily. I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan. When from behind that craggy steep, till then the horizon's bound, a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct, upreared its head. I struck and struck again, and growing still in stature, the grim shape towered up between me and the stars, and still, for so it seemed, with purpose of its own and measured motion like a living thing, strode after me. With trembling oars I turned, and through the silent waters stole my way, back to the covert of the willow tree. There in her mooring place I left my bark, and through the meadows homeward went in grave and serious mood. But after I'd seen that spectacle, for many days my brain worked with a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being. Over my thoughts, there hung a darkness. Call it solitude or blank desertion. No familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields, but huge and mighty forms that do not live like living men, move slowly through the mind by day, and were a trouble to my dreams. So that's the poem, and it is quite challenging, but today we're going to try and keep it really simple and just think about what it is that we actually need to know for the examination, get a really good understanding of what the poem is about and get some key moments. Now, when you go into the exam, you're going to need to think really carefully about how you structure your response. You'll be given one poem, and I know that lots of students will be hopeful that it won't be Extract from the Prelude. But of course, after spending some time thinking about it together, that will certainly help prepare you for it, should it be the named poem. So you get one of them in the exam booklet, one of them's named, and you have to choose one to compare it to. Now, the way to structure your response is to start with a paragraph that tells us about how both of your poems, the named one and the one you've chosen from your memory, relate to the theme in the question. So tell us what they're about, but be concise, keep it simple. So here's an example from me. Extract from the Prelude is a poem about an experience with nature that changed Wordsworth's perspective. In the poem, he rows a stolen boat across a lake, and his observation of a mountain ridge deeply affects him. And then after you've done that for both poems, the next thing you should do is write a paragraph where you just explain the structure in both poems. Okay, so after we've explored the the meanings of the poems and a little bit of context in the opening paragraph. Our second paragraph is going to explore structure. We only need a sentence or two about each of the poems. So explore the choices of rhyme scheme from the writers, their use of metre, and perhaps the structure of the poem if there's anything interesting to say, but then relate that to the theme of the question. And here's an example of how I've done that in a couple of sentences for extract from the Prelude. So we've got iambic pentameter in the poem. The use of iambic pentameter in extract from the Prelude is effective in creating an assured tone. It's a really huge moment in Wordsworth's life, this experience. So giving the iambic pentameter as the meter perhaps makes it seem significant and powerful. But we haven't got a rhyme scheme. It's written in blank verse. So I've said this. Wordsworth's poem is about his feelings of conflict and uncertainty, and this could be the reason for his choosing not to adopt a rhyme scheme, choosing blank verse instead. So it sort of shows how his life's been thrown into chaos and disarray, and perhaps his choice of avoiding a rhyme scheme sort of reflects that. So, now in your English lessons, what we tend to do as English teachers is we give you your anthologies and we underline, and some of you, as you can see, may have colour-coded, some of you may have colour-coded and annotated, and some of you may have just gone absolutely over the top and written all that sort of stuff. Now, the thing that I think is really important to know is that in 45 minutes, the amount of time that you're given to respond to the poems, you're really not going to be able to spend that much time. If you had that in front of you, which of course you're not allowed, but if you snuck your anthology into the exam hall, you're not going to have the time to make any meaningful comments, using this alone. So I think the thing to remember is you're walking in needing to know what's the poem about in simple terms. What's the choice of form and structure, and what are 3 or 4 really good quotes that I'm going to be able to talk about? So this poem, extract from the Prelude, has got some really, when I say archaic, old-fashioned sort of words that we don't use anymore. So an elfin pinnace, you don't need to know what that is. A bark is a boat, but to be honest with you, you can get away with it without knowing that. But we do need to know, 4 key quotes to be able to take away and be ready to analyse them. So, we can move away from worrying too much about every single line and the meaning of every single word. And let's try and keep it simple. So here's a flashcard that does that. My boat went heaving through the water like a swan is the first quote that I'm going to learn and memorise. So there in that top left-hand corner is an image of a swan, and that simile there, like a swan, it's suggesting beauty and calm. So the first half of the poem, his experiences are peaceful and satisfying, and that image reflects that. And over the other side, we've got straight iron loosed her chain. This is him, unchaining the boat that he's going to take out on the lake, and we've got chains that symbolise imprisonment and this is a liberating moment for the speaker, for Wordsworth. Taking that boat has got all these associations of freedom and liberation, and they of course change when he observes this mountain ridge. So we've got the grim shape towered up between me and the stars. That there's personification there, creating a really fearful sort of intense moment. And that adjective grim, we can associate that with death. So him looking at the mountain is maybe him also thinking about his own mortality, the fact that he's not going to live forever, and he's having to sort of face his own, fleeting existence. So and we can call that an existential crisis that brings about in Wordsworth. And we've got over my thoughts there hung a darkness, call it solitude or blank desertion. And we've got that use of desertion there, that it's an abstract noun, but this sort of allusion to desertion could be him experiencing a loss of faith, feeling that there is no God. Because it's not just about him looking at a mountain and feeling insignificant, it's about him reevaluating life and what it means. I'm going to leave you with the assessment objectives. You can see them here on the screen. We've got them there. You're welcome to pause the screen and have a little look at them. Think about how you're going to use your understanding of this poem to meet those objectives, and feel free to go back over moments in the poem. Make sure that you've taken that flashcard and save that, and then revisit those key moments and the key terms for the structure in your own time. And thank you for joining me.